Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the must-love books and television, the connection between television, writers, and pop culture. This is my favorite panel of the entire BookFest. I love, love, love entertainment. I love television. I love movies. And if you love to talk to people who write about television and write for television, you have entered the greatest panel happening during this BookFest. So I won't spend too much time talking anymore about it. I wanted to get right into our panelists so we can ask them as many questions as possible. First person I want to introduce is Mr. Brad Dukes. Give a wave out there, Brad, so people can know which one you are. Now, Brad is the author of Reflections, an oral history of Twin Peaks and China Beach, a book about TV show about a war. And I love both of those shows, so I can't wait to plug your brain about that.
Oh, great.
Next up, we have Herbie J. Pilato. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Go ahead and wave your hand, Herbie. Herbie is a writer, producer, and a classic TV talk show host. He is of Amazon Prime's Then Again with Herbie J. Pilato, and the author of pop culture celebrity books like those about Mary Tyler Moore and Elizabeth Montgomery, which we all know is she's famous for the Bewitched television series in the 70s, one of my very favorite shows growing up. Oh my God, I used to do my nose like this so many times, my mother hated me, but we'll get into that later. And then next we have Deborah M. Pratt. Now, Deborah is a writer, director, producer, and author of the Vision Quest series, and executive producer and writer for Quantum Leap, which was a great television show. 4-time Emmy nominee and a Golden Globe nominee. So she's quite decorated. We're so happy to have you during this panel. And then last but not least, we have Scott Ryan. Scott, go ahead and give a wave to everybody there. He is a TV historian, publisher, and author of 30-something at 30, an oral history, which was another one of my favorite TV shows, The Last Days of David Letterman, and the forthcoming Moonlighting, an oral history. So I want to get right into it. You guys have written about some of my most favorite TV shows over the decades. There's so much to write out there. I would like each and every one of you guys to tell me why you chose the show that you chose. Let's go ahead and start with you, Brad.
Well, I grew up with Twin Peaks. I watched it as a 9-year-old kid, and my mom is still embarrassed about that. And I just grew up with the show. It never left my imagination. I watched it in 1990 as a kid, and, grew up, and it came out on DVD, and you could watch it, in a digital way that you hadn't been able to see before. And so that kind of just, poured gasoline on the fire of my fandom. And then with China Beach, when I was doing my book about Twin Peaks, I talked to a few executives at ABC, and they were just so proud of China Beach. They always talked about it. Right. And I remembered seeing it, a long, long time ago. And I went back and watched it and was just completely blown away with it. And that kind of just dovetailed into writing a book.
Wow. You chose great topics, and I know you probably got a lot of people writing in once those books came out, because there's such a legion of fans. I feel like there should be a Comic-Con just for those two shows alone,
Yeah, totally.
Definitely. Well, how about you, Herbie? Talk to us about how you chose the shows that you chose.
Well, I grew up in Rochester, New York, inner city, and I was a cute little kid, and I was picked on all the time. This is the story. This is how it goes. And I gravitated toward 60s TV and escapism, and Bewitched was number one. I was fascinated with the show and how these two very different people loved each other despite those differences. And when I grew up and became an adult and moved to Los Angeles, I watched a TV show called I Dream of Jeannie 15 years later, which was a reunion movie of that show.
Absolutely love that show.
And that was kind of like a takeoff on Bewitched. So I just thought, let me write a reunion about Bewitched. That didn't work. And then I wrote the book. Wow. And then I became an author. And then we did a documentary about the show for the E! Channel. And then I started writing books about Kung Fu and the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, that there was this this theme of prejudice throughout all of those shows. That Samantha was a witch in a mortal world. Cain was an Asian in a Western world, and so this was this thread. I didn't want to make them just trivia books, but books about shows that meant something to people.
Good to hear. Deborah, what about you? I mean, you're so decorated, and you wrote about Quantum Leap. I would imagine it was probably harder for someone, woman, to come in and be on a hit show like that and have that kind of success. Can you talk to me about how you chose to write about Quantum Leap and how you got involved with the show?
Well, I was doing two Belisarius shows at the same time. I was doing Airwolf and Magnum PI.
Okay.
And I had this concept of time travel. And the idea was that time and space was limited. So you couldn't actually leap in and be the sixth person in this conversation. You had to knock somebody out and be there with them. And that opened all kinds of doors to creating stories that, and we limited it because of budget.
Right.
Creating all kinds of stories that took you into the lives of people. So I think the first year I wrote an episode where he leapt into a woman, and I dealt with sexism. And that year I also wrote where he leapt into a Black man, and I dealt with racism in the 50s. It was pre-civil rights. So we got to say something every week. And the beauty, I think, the real beauty of the show is that we told both sides of someone's story. Right. So you, the audience, who we honored as being intelligent, and back then there were 3 shows. We were always up against China Beach and Hill Street Blues. No matter where they moved us, we ended up against them so many times. I think we were moved 6 times in the 5 years.
Oh my God, that many times?
The fans followed us everywhere we went, which is why the show is still popular, I think, today, and why they want to bring it back. So
wow. Let's talk more about that. I'd love to know about them bringing it back, because there's so many shows that are having remakes now, especially because of all the streaming networks that we have to do deals like that. I mean, it used to just be networks. Now there's so many different ways to bring these shows back.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Scott, let's talk about why you chose to write the books that you wrote.
Well, I gotta just disrupt this panel because I love Deborah Pratt. I'm in love with Deborah Pratt. I am watching Quantum Leap with my wife right now. We've been watching it. I didn't know Deborah Pratt was going to be on this thing. And every good episode of Quantum Leap is written by Deborah Pratt. And then I see who's on this panel, and it's like I'm booked with the Beatles. Who cares about 30-something and Moonlighting? We got the Quantum Leap lady. Okay. Right. Now I'll behave. Deborah, later I'm going to ask you if you would come on my podcast, because we got to talk about Quantum Leap. Okay, I'm obsessed. But now I'll be professional. I wrote a book about 30-something because 30-something is, to me, one of the very best shows. Not as good as Quantum Leap, but I actually love 30-something and Moonlighting, and I made a connection with the producers, which opened it up to getting the interviews. And if you don't have the executive producers sort of blessing, then I think it's so much harder to do a book about a TV show, because you want to get the inside stories. And I was just lucky enough to make those connections, and it really opened the doors for the books that I've worked on.
Wow.
How did I do it becoming professional after fanning out for a second? Did I see both sides?
I would give you an A+. How about that?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to behave for the rest of the time. And I'm not going to ask her to make the leap home. I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm going to behave.
Right. Well, let me start back with Brad again. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Twin Peaks, because it's had a more recent version, I think around 2017, with Showtime in a limited series. How were you able, in writing your book, able to get so many secrets and able to get everybody to open up in back of the camera, in front of the camera, to you to dish out some things that maybe fans did not know much about the show?
That's a great question. And it was really a lot of luck. Early on, I became friends with Mark Frost, who was the co-creator of Twin Peaks with David Lynch. Okay. And so I would always drop his name, whoever I was approaching, to talk to me. And so I guess that gave me a lot of credibility. And, but yeah, I mean, Twin Peaks, there's a lot of mystery to it. It always bothered me. I never really understood why the show was canceled after it was like this huge pop culture phenomenon.
Mhm.
And within, months, it was canceled and forgotten about.
Yeah.
But it was really, I mean, I hadn't done any journalism before I wrote that book. I just did my blog. And I think maybe my casual manner maybe disarmed some people, not
Ah,
being a professional with their tricks.
right. Someone maybe writing those hardcore investigative pieces that may have turned them off a little bit. They saw you as possibly a fan, but somebody who really wanted to do the show well, maybe,
Yeah, but
just
it was also, I had to juggle my fandom with, getting to the heart of the matter. I couldn't just get Kyle MacLachlan on the phone and be like, oh my God, Dale Cooper.
right.
I had to exercise some control, but it was so much fun. I spent 2 years, over 2 years interviewing cast and crew, and it was really a blast.
What, out of all the things that you learned over those 2.5 years, was there one thing that stood out that surprised you, even you, knowing so much about the show already?
Yeah, I think one of the most amazing things was Steven Spielberg almost directed the second season premiere.
What?
Yeah. And I thought that was amazing. And I even though I love the episode he should have directed, I can't help but wonder what Spielberg would have done with it.
Yeah. Everybody wants to have that Spielberg touch.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah,
definitely.
That's interesting to know that was even a consideration. I'd never heard of that at all.
Yep. It's true.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting to know. I want to talk to you, Herbie, about Elizabeth Montgomery, because I feel like she's one of the most underrated TV shows or TV stars from the 70s ever. I absolutely love that show. I also loved her nosy neighbor. I think it was Miss Gladys, whatever her name was. It was very always snooping into the business or whatnot. I'm just wondering if you could kind of talk about why you thought she was important to write about. I mean, because she is an interesting character. It's a very, very hit show. But I'll be honest, there's not a lot of information out there, other books rather, written about Elizabeth Montgomery.
Yeah, no, she was just a special person. I was enthralled with her. I loved her as a kid, who didn't love her, was in love with her, whatever. And when I wanted to really address this show and what it all meant, I became obsessed with it in a good way. And as you were saying, Brad, you have to balance it out when you contact celebrities or anyone associated with the show, because you don't want to come off as a fan, and yet you don't want to not be a fan. So you have to balance that all out. So I had originally contacted her to do this reunion movie, like I said before. She didn't want to do that. And then they were going to do a new show called Bewitched again. And I was going to be a writer on that. And Bill Asher, who was married to Elizabeth, he produced and directed the original show. So he was going to do this new show. And then Elizabeth was going to come on in this new show and introduce a new witch, Pop Off Forever. So anyway, the financing for that fell through, but I still had all this bewitched energy. And so Bill Asher was the one who told Elizabeth that you really need to talk with Herbie. Herbie's really concerned with this entity known as Bewitched. And so when I met her, she finally called my house after 6 months, because she was very apprehensive. 6 months.
Wow. I wonder what made her so apprehensive about you, though. That's interesting.
She didn't want to talk about Bewitched. She really had moved on after the show ended. So when she finally did call me, and I remember she called the house, left a message on my voicemail. It was the 80s, so I still had a machine. And I called her back and I said, I'm so sorry. I was doing my laundry. I missed your call. And she said, as you should. I mean, she was just such a down-to-earth person, and I knew we were going to get along right from that. So I went over to her house. She invited me over, and I walked in the door, reached out my hand, and tripped over the coffee table. And we both laughed about that, and again, we bonded. So she said, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this book about the show? Because it was originally I did a book about the show. And I told her all the things that I said before about there's prejudice, strong work ethic, true love, friendship, all of that. And she goes, okay. And she opened up to me, Bill's the one who said that I needed to talk with you, she said. And she said, he never says I need to talk with anybody. So I made an impression on Bill, and then he paved the way.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. That's a great story to know. Deborah, I'd like to turn to you and just talk about, time travel. The thing I love about shows about time travel is that you really don't have any boundaries whatsoever. I mean, you can just really go anywhere with the show. And I love that. You had so many great episodes with the show. Is there one episode that really stood out that you are?
You ask me that
proud
all
of?
the time. That's a very tough question to ask.
It's like asking my favorite child, right?
Exactly, exactly. There were a lot of episodes that had, very deep meaning, because one of the beauties of we were limited in space. It was his lifetime, and we couldn't afford to go to the future, so we stayed in the past. But we were in the 50s and in the 60s, and doing the research and choosing the shows. Just the other day, I caught an episode that I wrote called Black and White on Fire.
Oh,
That is so timeless because it's about the Watts riots in the 60s, in 1968, which actually led to riots across the country, and the fact that Lyndon B. Johnson created what was called the Kerner Commission, which my father actually worked on. And the commission was to go in and look at why there were race riots. And the findings was because Black and white people and brown people don't live together. And if they lived together, they would see that they were just people. And this amazing 700-page document that they had spent years doing was just kind of buried. And had we done it back then, who knows where we would be today.
Right.
But the show itself, when we shot it, he leapt into a young Black man who was a doctor in Watts right before the riots, in love with a white woman. And they banned the show in the South. They wouldn't air it.
Wow. Who knew? Really?
Yeah. So there was a big, I think 3 states banned it. And the wild thing was, for 95% of the show, it was Scott Bakula, who was Caucasian, with a white girl who was Caucasian. And there were a few mirror shots of him being a Black man. And I think most of those he was by himself. So I don't know what their problem was other than the idea. So again, go back to why that show got to talk about today.
Yeah.
At a time so far away, but it opened up the water cooler conversation. And if I can add this, we were the first online water cooler conversation show. We found people in what were called chat rooms back then.
Yes. I know it feels like MySpace when you say that.
That's exactly what it was. But we could go in and hear what they liked about the show. And at that time, there were only 3 networks. So we would get 25, 30 million people watching the show.
Wow.
Big, different time, but it moved the conversation.
Right. And I can't even imagine. I mean, I love the show so much. I just didn't see it as controversial at all. I couldn't even imagine any episode possibly even being banned. I mean, when I think back, I'm trying to think, was there anything that was, I don't think so. But wow, that's interesting to know that was even a consideration back then.
There were shows we had to fight to get on the air. And Brandon Tartikoff, bless his heart, was a true visionary. And when I said, I want to do him as a woman, I remember my co-executive producer saying, year three. And I went, no, year 1. The audience is with us. Let's go for it.
Right.
And people came with us.
Right.
And the journey, I think when we ended the show, the last big argument I had was, don't let him come home. Leave him out there helping people in the world, because it'll make the show alive. And I think that's why it still runs in syndication. And it's, I go into meetings, I feel so old, and these young executives will say, oh my God, I love what
They've been influenced by your work too. They've been influenced by your work. That's wonderful to hear.
So that's
who would ever behave like that? That would be ridiculous. I mean, should have some respect. That episode, Black on White on Fire, I just watched it 2 weeks ago. And it is incredible. And I just sat there like, how amazing that it was still relevant today. How sad that it seemed like you just wrote it like right now. And it is an incredible, incredible episode. I love that you picked that one.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think it's, and that was the whole thing of finding things that were timeless about the show and why it's so important. And wait, but I have to ask Herbie a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
I loved Bewitched. I loved it. That was like growing up. That was like, I wish I had. I think that's what gave me my sci-fi. I want to have superpowers kind of show. There was a show, a movie called Bell, Book, and Candle.
Yeah.
Was it Kim Novak?
Yeah. Yeah. What happened was that was Columbia. And years before that, there was I Married a Witch, which was with Veronica Lake, which was also Columbia. So there was no real, legal issues because it was the same studio. And Bell, Book, and Candle and I Married a Witch were both about the courtship of a mortal and a witch. Bewitched was about a marriage after the marriage. So that's also what made it slide by. But yeah, there were some issues regarding that. People questioned it. But like you were talking about how your show is banned in parts of the country. Bewitched was banned in the Bible Belt area because they thought it, promoted Satanism. And everybody was like, dude, the show is about love.
They're seeing too much into it, way too much into it.
Just let it go. I mean, these two people love each other. And it was also, one of the reasons why it was so popular in the 60s, the day of rehearsal was the day of President Kennedy's assassination. And Elizabeth and Bill Asher were good friends with the president. And Bill Asher actually directed and produced the inaugural ball of President Kennedy. So here they were, they're the president of the country, and their dear friend was assassinated. What would they do? They felt they had to go on to continue because the show addressed exactly, in a backdoor kind of way, what was going on. Many minority groups, of different cultures were attracted to Samantha's sense of isolation. I was bullied, so I was attracted to that sense of connecting with her and feeling isolated. African Americans, Italian Americans, all minority groups, the gay communities, hugely connected with Samantha's sense of isolation. So there's so much. There's so much about this show. I mean, now they're remaking it, as a movie. So
that's going to be interesting. I hope they do it justice.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I think they will. I think they will because
fingers crossed.
Nose twitched.
Nose twitch, exactly.
It's a universal story. It's about love.
Right.
It's love.
Scott, I want to turn things to you because you've written a number of books. One of my favorite shows was Moonlighting with Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd. And, there are two things that always stood out to me about that show that was always talked about. Number one, that Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd off camera did not get along. And number two, that there was a huge filter that was very different that was used for Sybil Shepherd. Like if you do a split screen and you look at Sybil and then you do another screen and you look at Bruce Willis, it was like they were in two different worlds in terms of the way that they looked, because the filter seemed to be very sexy and glossy and soft for Sybil Shepherd and a little bit different for Bruce Willis. Are any of those things true at all? I'm wondering, you've written about it.
Right. Well, they're both true. We'll take the filter first. So the filter was not something that Sybil Shepherd demanded. Jerry Finnerman was the DP on Moonlighting, and he was trained by the guy, I can't think of his name now, but he was the DP on Star Trek. So it was a very old school lighting guy. And it's more than just Sybil. And rewatching the show, I was flabbergasted at the lighting on Moonlighting. And I did talk to all of the directors about it. And he said, because Bruce and Sybil didn't get along, there was a lot of call Bruce to the set. And then, well, is Sybil on set yet? No. Is Bruce on set yet? No. They had time to light. So they said we would have the most simplest scene to do, and
That is
neither
just
of
the
them would
craziest
come.
thing to me.
Yeah,
I
they
always thought
wouldn't
that was
come out of their
crazy.
trail. So because they wouldn't come out, they could light. Because there's this one scene that I showed Alan Arkish, who's directed all kinds of TV. I asked him, like, why is this throwaway scene so beautiful? And he said, oh, we had all day to do it. Now in my book, I don't really lean in towards their relationship off camera. I don't really care about gossip. When I work on my TV books, I focus on the art and the craft.
Okay.
But their relationship was so tumultuous that it affected the writing, it affected the lighting, it affected everything.
Wow.
They get along fine now, all of them
Okay.
do. And you can throw Glenn Gordon Caron in that in having, but all of those stories do come out in the book just because it was a crazy, crazy set. It's amazing they ever got any of those episodes made.
I mean, because it was one of my favorite shows, and they really had the great chemistry on screen. That's why I was always surprised to hear you couldn't sense that. You couldn't sense that they didn't really get along offset. You know what I mean? Because they worked so well.
Admits that they fought right before they were supposed to fight, and she thinks that's what helped their fights. Is that they were fighting right ahead of time. But again, they love each other now. No hard feeling. Nobody has any hard feelings. But at the time, well, that set was nuts. It's crazy that it ever got made at all.
Well, talk to me a little bit about 30-something. That was another one of my favorite shows. I love that as well. I mean, it's a little bit later than the Moonlighting, but what's been your experience writing about that show? Because there were so many beloved characters on there, and it just came across as so authentic when it dealt with real marriages and relationships.
Yeah, 30-something is the exact opposite of Moonlighting. Those writers loved each other, and they're all intermarried. So the creators are Marshall and Ed, both their wives wrote on the show. Patricia Wedig and Ken Olin, they played opposite husband and wives, but they were married in real life. So that entire show was interwoven with family and love and sharing every aspect of it. Patricia Wedig tells a story in the book where she told one of the writers what she had told her son before bed, and 3 scripts later she's saying the exact speech to her TV son in the show. I mean, they stole every single thing from every one of their lives. So have you done that, Deborah? What episode is it?
Sam leapt into, I can't think of the title. Sam leapt into a black background singer with like a Supremes girl group. And the storyline.
Wait a minute. Spoiler, I haven't got to that episode yet. I'm in season 3, episode 14, so don't ruin anything, but continue.
The episode was that this young girl's father was a preacher, and he didn't want her to go into show business because he felt it was, sinful and the devil and everything like that. So I had a fight with my husband about being, possessive and controlling. And every word of it, I just wrote into the scene between the father and the daughter. And he came into my office and said, never do that again.
Oh, gosh.
But it's so powerful to take that emotion of what you're going through and put it down on the page, because it's so real. And it really, you change the characters, you change the names, but the words are what we all go through. When somebody in our life, and it doesn't matter who they are in those relationships. So I completely understand how they use that. And I can think of, even in the Saga Cell, which was the speech that you were talking about at the opening of the show, I remember writing that and going, what's the goal of this show? And it's to get home, but it's also to walk in someone else's shoes. And that said to me, to every member of the audience, everyone that watched the show, put yourself in somebody else's shoes and then tell me how you feel. Imagine what it's like if you had to live their life and then tell me what you feel. And if we did more of that, I think we would be better humans. So it's what you want to say to people without preaching, like you were saying, without preaching, putting your thoughts and your heart and your emotions into the words that you write for people to speak. and letting the audience put themselves into those characters to be those characters in that situation. It's the power of television that I kind of miss. And when it happens, I think that's why shows are hits, because the audience that's their best friend, and they're right there in there with them because they're going through what they're going through.
You know, Brett, looking at the show China Beach, when I think of shows that are centered around a war, obviously MASH is up there at the highest. I mean, just one of the best written shows ever. But China Beach isn't too far behind it. I really enjoy that. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like to get some secrets about China Beach and to write about that show.
Yeah, well, I mean, I pretty much talked to every single person that worked on that show. And, you know, from the two guys that created it, John Young and Bill Broyles, they both had really intense personal ties to the war. Bill was over there for a couple of years, I believe, as a Marine. John's cousin died in combat. And so I think when you have that kind of foundation, everybody takes it seriously. And I mean, it was emotional. I mean, I didn't just talk to actors and crew. I talked to Vietnam vets that served over there. I talked to nurses. And, you know, that gets into some crazy territory with just emotional landmines. And
did they think that you got it right? Because it's always so important, you know, when you're talking to people who actually were in the war, to look at television and say, yes, they nailed it. That's exactly what was going on. That's how we felt. Or they didn't exaggerate anything and make it too, quote unquote, Hollywood.
I mean, I heard all kinds of opinions about that. I mean, I heard vets say, you know, oh, they nailed it. This was just like it. And then some vets were like, it was nothing like that, you know. But, you know, what was so important about that show is it told stories that I don't think have been told in any medium, at least on TV or film. I mean, a woman's perspective in Vietnam. I mean, tell me anything else that has captured that in long form. And
no one,
you know, that war ended over 50, is almost 50 years done, and it's not really been tackled aside from China Beach. So, you know, it was exhilarating. I mean, it was draining and emotional at times, but it was, you know, it fed my soul in many ways. And I remember I was really almost depressed when I finished that book because,
oh, wow, you
know, that chapter of life was ending. And, you know, I went to Vietnam with my wife for a few weeks to kind of document that part of my experience for the book. So it was 360 degrees, you know, fun and scary and emotional.
Wow. I'm wondering, you know, you guys are all such great writers. Are there any shows, whether they're on network or streaming networks now, that you look at that you're impressed with? Because you guys are so highly acclaimed. I'm wondering if there's any current shows that you guys look at and you're proud of, or you say to yourself, I wouldn't have mind writing for that show or writing a book about that show.
For me, it's Fargo. I think Fargo is one of the best shows of this century so far. I was at an event with my 30-something book, and Noah Wiley was there. And, you know, you got to get the executive producer in. And I thought, well, I do have a book. I mean, he's going to want to talk to me. And so I went up to him and I had my 30-something book, and I was like, hey, I love Fargo. I'd love to. And he was, hello, sir? I mean, he was gone. He was like, well, I guess I won't be doing a Fargo book. So it doesn't always work out as good as it did for Herbie and Elizabeth. But
right.
I think Fargo.
Fargo, okay. What about anyone else? Are there any shows out there that you guys look at that you're very impressed with at all?
Well, I mean, here we are almost 60 years later talking about Bewitched. I don't think we're going to be talking about what was The Dead? What is The Dead show? What's it called?
Oh, yes.
Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Walking Dead. I don't think we're going to be talking about The Walking Dead. We could be. I don't know, but I don't know if we would. I think the last great shows that I would have done books on are Frasier and Reba. I love.
Really interesting, Reba.
Reba. I mean, it addresses so many different things: divorce, teen pregnancy, and it's a funny, and it's not joke. It's about characterization. I don't see a lot of characterization today. I see a lot of similar characters. I see everybody sarcastic today. Everybody rolls their eyes. Everybody's beautiful. It's just there's not
Blame
enough.
that on Instagram.
I don't know. So Frasier was to me the last great sitcom. It was the last great. The sets, the writing, the cast, the stories. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end. It wasn't just characters standing up and doing like stand-up routines, which I see a lot on sitcoms today. There's a lot of talent out there. I'm not saying there isn't talent, but there isn't a lot of guidance on what a good show is. And I think that's why classic TV shows are so popular, because you look at, you're flipping through the channels and you see all this dark, dingy, depressing stuff. And then you see that girl, you're going to stop at that girl.
Right.
Those likable characters played by Ted Bessel and Marlo Thomas, just two of the most adorable characters on TV. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. It could be better.
Right.
And there's a lot of talent out there. Again, I want to make that clear. But there's a lot of depressing stuff. And that isn't to say that we shouldn't look at reality, but TV should be entertaining. And in a show like Quantum Leap and Bewitched, where it's sci-fi and fantasy, you can address topics that you really might not be able to address in a regular show or a non-sci-fi fantasy show, which is another reason why I think those shows were so popular. And I'm really shocked to hear, Deborah, that there were so many objections to your show, or that, there's so many episodes that people felt were too much, when it was all within a sci-fi realm. Do you know what I mean? I thought maybe you could address things more indirectly. So I'm shocked to hear that.
I guess the reality is, yes, it is about time travel and the leap in and leap out at the beginning and the end of each show. But once you got into the show, it was a snapshot of life. So it really was reality with a franchise that was science fiction. And we took history and fantasized about it. We made up stories. Very rarely did we touch real history. We did one with Marilyn Monroe. We did one with Kennedy's assassination. And that was because Don Belisario knew who assassinated him.
Right.
He met him.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, when he was leaving the Marines, they were both leaving the Marines. And I think, I can't think of his name.
Oswald.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
There we go. Thank you.
He met him. He said, I'll never forget, he was reading Marx's book. And there was something very, very odd about him, but they were coming through some kind of transition. And when he was accused of the shooting, and he truly believed that Lee Harvey Oswald, there was no, third shooter, second shooter somewhere else, because he had a real feeling from this guy. So he wanted to tell that story. And I think it was the same time that Oliver Stone's movie with Kevin Costner came out. And he didn't like Oliver Stone's interpretation of it, and was just compelled because he had that interaction with him. So those stories all came from the writers, and I was head of the writers' room, and I really guided the writers to say, tell me your story and let's put it in a situation. And this goes back to what you were saying. I think hope is missing on television.
Charm. Where's the charm?
No charm.
I think it's gotten so dark, and the anti-heroes are so powerful. We were very blessed. Scott and Dean Stockwell loved each other. It made the set a pleasure to be a part of. Everybody in the writer's room, we were like this amazing family. And if we were late for anything, because we had, I think, 8 days to shoot that show, and it was period. Every week it was like a little movie, but Scott and Dean would play tricks on each other. The crew was all in on it. Scott was an amazing daddy on the set, you know. He knew everybody's name. He taught me, because that was my first series as an executive producer. And
Wow.
just his grace. You know, there weren't many women executive producers back there, especially in dramas. Definitely.
I mean, you came on to a hit show though right away. Most people have to work up to that, and you really came out.
It was my original idea, so I co-created it. Though I don't have a co-created by credit. The trade-off was learn how to produce TV.
Right.
And
Wow.
it was a great gift to suddenly have your own show, be head of the writer's room, be able to see instantly your ideas be created and learn. And Belisario was a great teacher. I mean, he's got shows that are still on the air. I think Magnum is its second incarnation, and
right.
NCIS.
And I'm wondering, Deborah, is there, I mean, I know there's shows that are missing hope and whatnot, but is there anything out there that you kind of look at and you find kind of funny or lighthearted at all that you like?
It was a strangely dark show, but I just watched the airline stewardess show.
Oh, on what was it? The flight attendant, I think, or something
Flight
like that.
attendant.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fascinating how they wrote it. I mean, I got totally hooked into Game of Thrones. I want to create a black Game of Thrones. That's my next journey.
Oh my God. You will see me watching it because I love the show and I'll definitely watch it.
Okay, definitely. I'm about to go out
Got
to
me as a fan already because I love Game of Thrones and I also love the flight attendant. I thought they did an amazing job too. The writing was
did an amazing job of the juxtaposition between her talking to this dead guy that she can't remember if she killed, and fighting her own demons at the same time.
Correct. And some people didn't get that, the subtlety of it, but I got it. But yeah, it was interesting and very different for HBO Max.
Just for fluff, the show with Lily Collins, where she goes to Paris and she's the fish out of water.
Oh, yes, that show too.
Besides, the clothes were really great from a chick point of view.
Guys like clothes too, but yeah, no, they had some fascinating clothes. The wardrobe department definitely deserves kudos for that.
And just really good writing. I liked Suits. I mean, that my son-in-law was on that show. So.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that. Interesting. I think a lot of people probably didn't know a lot about Suits before Meghan Markle. I think I had watched it once before, but obviously once, she came onto the scene, everybody kind of ran to see, okay, what is Suits, But I think it was one of those kind of sleeper hits where it definitely had its fan base for sure. I'm not sure if it was, highly rated or whatnot, but it was a pretty decent show for sure.
It did well. It's still in syndication. That's always
that's true. It is definitely still in syndication. What can you guys talk about? Anything that you plan on working on future wise, or is that just too much of a secret right now? Anybody?
Yeah, I'm working on 3 new books. A biography on Sean Connery, which is going to be interesting. Diana Rigg from the Avengers and Game of Thrones.
Okay.
And I'm working on a new biography, combined book about Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and their films. And that 3 different books at the same time is kind of a challenge, but they're paced out, separated by year. So that's good. So I'm excited about that. And of course, there's my show, on Amazon Prime.
Right. Well, I'm definitely interested in hearing more about Sean Connery because I kind of feel like I'm on the fence about him. I love his acting. I absolutely love his acting. But then there's the Sean Connery off camera that I've heard about.
Yeah. And it's tough. It's tough. And as a journalist, it's a tough position to be in because you have to be honest and you have to look at it and you have to be delicate about it. And you have to address all of those things honestly. But as I believe somebody else was saying on the panel, that I'm not into gossip. I'm not into hurtful, salacious material. And yet at the same time, I am a journalist, so you have to tell the truth. So it's a fine balance, and the story needs to be told. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, I'll definitely be looking for that. Anyone else want to talk about their future projects at all?
Yeah, my next book is about Firewalk with Me, which is the spinoff of Twin Peaks.
Oh,
So next year's the 30th anniversary of that. So that book's
Okay.
coming out next year. So I'll be sitting on Brad's shoulders and jump from his Twin Peaks book. And I'm gonna push Deborah to talk to me about Quantum Leap. So we'll see. You never know. Maybe a Quantum Leap book. Who knows?
Wasn't there already? I think there was a Quantum Leap book, wasn't there?
Yeah, but it won't be by me, so it doesn't count.
That makes all the difference.
There were several Quantum Leap books, as a matter of fact. I have started writing a Quantum Leap book that, if you're a fan of the show, deals with Sam's daughter, Sammy Jo.
Okay.
So if, depending on where you are in the series watching. And I also have 2 fantasy books, one children's book that I'm writing, and one is a fantasy adventure book of about 2 sisters that go through a portal. And then probably I'm going to, it's almost like a prequel to my Vision Quest books.
Okay.
I think I'm going to tie in Atlantis, which is the Black Game of Thrones, to my Vision Quest books in a strange way. So like you, Herbie, I've got multiple books moving. I'm at different chapters, but I had to stop and just get this pitch out. So I'm going to Amblin in 2 weeks, and we'll see where it goes.
Awesome.
So creating.
Did we get you, Brad, already?
No, I'm about 10 months into my next book. It's sort of a biography. I can't say much more than that, but it's really exciting.
No hint
and
at
the
all?
biography is about someone I'm friends with, so that's exciting to get everything firsthand. But that's it. That's all I'm working on right now. And I wanted to say earlier, the OA. Sorry to backtrack. The OA is the best show I've seen in the last 10 years. It had 2 seasons on Netflix, and then it got canceled. So if I ever win the lottery, I'm gonna, or let's say my next book is optioned into a movie, I'm gonna give all that money to Britt Marling so she can make the next season of the OA.
Speaking of that, I want to talk to you. Do you, since you guys regularly write about TV shows, obviously they're on network, and now that we have streaming, do you find it different in terms of writing for the streaming networks versus the actual network? Do you approach it differently now because the landscape and the television landscape is so varied and so different, or you just approach it the same?
Writing about the shows, or writing?
Yeah, if you're writing for the shows, the ones of you guys who are writing for the shows, is it different now? If you're writing a show and you're pitching it to a network versus, writing for a show that is going straight to streaming.
Well, there's so many options today. Before, back in the day, there were only 3 networks. Today, you would think, because there's so many options, that it would be easier, but it's really not for some reason. But a good idea is a good idea, and if you have that, you need to stick with it. I mean, I don't know how many people told me that I couldn't do what I've done, and they've told me that my whole life. You can't listen to that negative thinking. The way I look at it is, if you have a good idea, it's a whisper to you from the universe that you have to fulfill that idea. And if you don't pursue it in some way, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing the people who could benefit from your work a disservice. You just have to stick at it, and you can't let negativity stand in the way. I have several shows, that I've been trying to sell for years, and I'm not going to stop trying to sell them. I mean, I was 60 years old, 58, when I got my own TV show. I mean, I didn't, who knew? I didn't give up, and I'm balding, gray hair, the whole thing. It didn't stop me.
Let me tell you, you may be one of the few people in Hollywood that anxiously embraces their age. Everybody now is like going to IMDb and just like, oh, take that part down. You don't even say
please. I don't have the time.
I love it. What about you, Deborah? If you were pitching something or still writing for various shows now, would you approach streaming networks differently from how you're approaching the basic big 3, ABC, NBC, and CBS?
Yeah, you have to. Commercial television is very different from streamers. And even though some streamers have commercials, it's a different writing style to write an entire episode because you don't have to cut away. There doesn't have to be a cliffhanger at the end of 7 pages, which is what it is now because there's so many commercials. So on, the networks, there's just a different style. There's standards and practices, the kind of violence, the kind of language, so you have to look at different parameters. I mean, one of the reasons that I felt like I stepped away from television, I just directed the season ender for Grey's Anatomy last year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was a really exciting show to do because that's like a juggernaut show. And it's like somebody giving you a giant ship and said, here, go, don't sink it. And kudos to Debbie Allen and to Shonda and to Vanessa. I mean, so many people were amazingly supportive to give me leeway to do my vision, but I had to do the show because it's Grey's Anatomy. But even creating for that medium, you have to be aware of the fact that you have a very specific audience and they monitor their audience. Whereas you go to a Netflix and you can hit a pocket and secure an audience of viewers, and that's all you have to deal with. You don't have to do as universal an idea. In other words, the more people that you can include to get, I mean, I think 17 million was a huge number to get on a network television show these days. Most of them are 2 million or 7 million. Those are the successful shows a lot of times. So with Grey's and NCIS and those kind of shows, they just have monster followings that come back to them that I don't think, because they don't let those out, that Amazon, Disney, all those other net streamers are going to get to just because of the diversity that's out there. So they go to nations and they're looking for shows that hit Korea or hit Africa or hit the Latinx community. So it is very, very different. And then if you want to be on network, which is still the big game in town, you want to have as much universality. You have a very diverse cast. You have a very age diversified cast. That's the big difference for me. And you've got to end that act with a cliffhanger so that when they go watch 6 commercials, they remember why they're coming back and not turning away. That's the biggest lesson that I think I learned writing for network series, which I love. But
those are good lessons that I think even the newbies that are coming along only writing for streaming networks need to listen to, for sure. Yeah, Scott, I'm wondering, would you have any advice at all, especially for people who may be going towards streaming versus network, or anything you'd like to add?
Well, I loved hearing from both of them because I'm actually pitching a TV show, and from one of the books that we have done at my publishing company, and I think it is a great idea. And it was great to hear Herbie say, when you have an idea, you don't let it go, because I know we're almost out of time, but I'm just a little fish and I'm trying to play in a big pond, and I don't care. And I don't care what I don't know. I have a good idea for a show. We have a book to back it up, and I'm going to try my hardest. I want to be bolder than Herbie and grayer than Herbie. I make it finally for the first time. So I'm all for it.
all of them, by the way, want a book. If you have a book, a comic book, a video game, and it's a proven entity, or even if it's a fresh new entity, a book is a card to get you through the door. So write a book.
Yes. Write the book first. Yes.
We've got it.
That's interesting to know. I think, I always thought about that too. I'm like, do you just write up the spec or have the pitch deck and you go in and you pitch the TV show, or is it better to take the book, angle? Because they even say the same thing when it comes to movies. If you write a really hit book, then all the studios will come to you and want to option it off as a movie. So I wonder this, the same thing, whether it's television or movies. Is it the book always first?
I heard a great story about, and I'm sure maybe some of you know this, about Love Story. They wrote, apparently he wrote the script, Eric Siegel. He wrote the script first, took it to the studio and says, no, turn it into a book, make it a major seller, then we'll have something to leap from. And it worked. They planned it all out, you know. So he had actually written the script first, then turned the script into a book. The book became a bestseller, which paved the way for the movie. So there you go.
That's the way it's done. And we're coming up against time, so I want to have to get out of here. But thank you, everybody, for tuning into this panel. I hope you've learned a lot. Thank you to all our amazing panelists today. Thank you for tuning into BookFest.
Mary Tyler Moore. Thank you so much.
It was so great. It was an honor.